They claim they was taken from West Africa. I don't know how this could be when in 1805, West Africa wasn't even populated. And we skip all over. They had the American Colonization Society, which was taking indigenous people from America to Liberia. They were taking them to Liberia.
What if I told you they didn't free us? They shipped us out like a recall on stolen property. Let's talk Liberia. Yeah, that Liberia. Liberia wasn't built for Africans. It was built for us, so-called African Americans, but not out of love. This was a relocation scam run by the American Colonization Society, ACS, real quiet-like. Back in 1816, them white boys, politicians, slaveholders, even clergymen, said, we got to get rid of these free Negroes. Too free, too loud, too dangerous. So they pushed a scheme, free them, then exile them, ship them to West Africa, brand it Liberia, land of liberty, whole country built on a lie.
See, they penciled us out. We got our asses with pen by pencil. Not physically in person, like pencil on paper. The triangle trade also tells you about North American slaves. Now, if you just said all of us are African, what is a North American slave? That's very distinguishable from an African slave and a North American slave. That's not something you're going to confuse. So in talking about that triangle trade, it leads you to ACS. ACS represents two things: the American Colonization Society and the African Colonization Society that they partnered with because of the Royal African Slavery Company that enslaved and transported more slaves than anybody. So in this story about this triangle trade that involves the transatlantic trade, they took North American slaves out of America and relocated them into places like Nova Scotia and London. If you took and placed North American slaves in West Africa to build up places like Sierra Leone and Liberia, there is a website called blackpast.org that is written and operated by Liberians. One of the passages on there tells you about how they brought North American slaves into West Africa and warred with the indigenous population. Now, when I first heard it and read it, I had to go back because something wasn't adding up. So we went from being African slaves to being North American slaves and warring with the indigenous population of West Africa. If you're warring with that indigenous population, you aren't a part of these people. These people aren't you. If they know that you are American, why you don't know you're American?
They keep saying your DNA ties you to Sierra Leone, but that's not where we came from. That's where they deported us. After the American Revolution, Britain had a problem. Thousands of so-called black loyalists, indigenous Americans who fought on their side, were now free. Britain shipped them first to Nova Scotia, but the cold, broken promises and lack of land pushed them into desperation. In 1787, Britain launched the Sierra Leone Company. Their plan? Dump the unwanted free blacks from America and the Caribbean in West Africa.
Let's go with this map.
Okay.
Can you see how West Africa is not populated?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the 1805 map of Africa. Okay?
They told our people, you're African, not American. We just helping you go home. But here's the truth. Most of us ain't from Africa. We were indigenous to the Americas, born right here, but reclassified, erased, deported. Receipts say over 12,000 plus black folks were sent off. Many coerced, some flat out kidnapped. Those who stayed kept getting reclassified as colored, Negro, never indigenous. Even crazier, the ones who made it to Liberia, they built an American-style society, top hats, churches, and class systems, then turned around and colonized the native Africans already there, just like they were colonized here. Trauma recycled. Let's keep it a buck. They didn't want to help us. They wanted us gone. The colonizers were cleaning house, quietly, legally, permanently. So the next time you hear somebody say, we African, ask them, if we came from Africa, Why did they have to ship us to Africa? They wasn't sending us back. They was sending us away, reclassified, removed, replaced.
And they said they took us from Africa. Well, how did they take us from Africa, West Africa? If we're looking at West Africa in 1805, and it's unoccupied, like this bitch is dead.
Indian slavery was a real thing. You got the transatlantic slave trade, Indian slave trade, and much more going on within that. That's why it's called the triangular trade, because they didn't just trade people, they traded goods. Things taken from here and over there to be processed, wrapped, packaged, and sold from over there at a higher value, whereas it's free here. If you're gonna look up the transatlantic, look up the triangle trade. But if you really want to know how people got here, you need to look at the Pacific trade. They brought people in through the Pacific, not just the Atlantic. It's very difficult for people to make it through the Atlantic, even in present day. So if present day, the Atlantic Ocean is flipping over boats, what do you think happened back then? Go read about the triangle trade and then look up slavevoyages.com, because also within that, the steamboat didn't come out to the 1800s. Women could not make that voyage because of sanitation reasons. So the majority of people that were transported were men. So if you're telling me that you have a great-great-great-grandmother that was transported here in the 1600s, something's not right. There is a Mississippi in Africa. Mississippi is an Indian word. What is it doing in Africa? I had an African guy that heard me talking about that, thought I was wrong. So what I told him to do, if you want to prove me wrong, I would admit that I'm wrong if you can prove it. They've never done genealogy in Africa. That's not a thing. It's word of mouth. It's their oral story is what they do. Just like Indians, they tell orally what happened. So I encouraged him to look up his genealogy. Young man pulled his paperwork, realized that his grandmother was only there by way of ACS. He's American. He was like, well, it makes sense now. When you was mentioning Mississippi, he went and found Mississippi in Africa. He visited it. He said it's the style of the homes. I said they're called antebellum style homes that comes from to the south of the United States. He said, and we used to eat these things that were rolled up. They were made of yellow corn flour. I mean, the man described the hush puppy and didn't know what it was. He had been eating it his whole life. Mississippi in Africa is a real thing. That is an Indian word. So what is it doing in Africa? Are you saying those are Indians? Because where we go is where we take our stuff to. This baby over here eating a hush puppy and don't know what it is. So some of y'all Africans aren't Africans. Y'all are displaced Indians.
But there's even one better than that. This thing that they tell you about taking millions of people from West Africa and bringing them over here, there's some things you have to ask yourself. If they were so far in Africa and taking all these people away from there in the 1800s, why the race from Africa, the race for Africa, does not start until the top of the 1900s? Why in their own records they tell you they can never get past the coast because of mosquitoes and malaria? And it took the discovery of quinine so they can go over there to get into Africa. And that's when they started carving it up. This is their own records from their own story.
By 1792, more than 1,100 black loyalists from Nova Scotia were deported to Sierra Leone. They built Freetown, but carried American surnames, English language, and churches across the ocean. The story doesn't stop there. In 1796, Britain exiled over 500 Jamaican Maroons who had resisted colonial rule, first to Nova Scotia, then by 1800 deported again, this time to Sierra Leone. The Caribbean pipeline made it worse. Britain even sent recaptured slaves from illegal ships after 1807. They mixed them in with indigenous Americans and Maroons, erasing their true American origin. By the 1800s, Freetown was a colony of exiles, not Africans returning home. The records labeled them African settlers, but the receipts show the truth. These were deported indigenous Americans. The jury needs to see it clear. Sierra Leone is not our origin, it's our exile. When DNA kits say Sierra Leone, they're not proving Africa. They're tracing the trail of forced deportation,
When you hear a person ask the question, a Pan-African ask the question to say, well, how come y'all look more like the West Africans today more than y'all look like the Native Americans? Because we ain't the Native Americans, nigga. That's what we keep trying to tell y'all.
Let me specify before y'all go off. And all I would say is, okay, let's not say we don't know. If I don't know, I would say that you and your phenotype and every single one of the Aboriginals who have come on here look more like the West Africans today, the ones that are over there in Ghana today, than they do of the Native Americans who live on the reservations today. So all I'm saying is, how can we account for
the Negro that lived on
these niggas be so confused. They be so confused.
It's because we ain't the Native Americans, nigga. That's what we keep trying to tell y'all. And they took us. We keep telling y'all they took us into Africa, not out of Africa.
Frederick Douglass, in his own paper on January 22nd, 1852, Frederick Douglass had his own section in the paper called the Colonization Scheme, into where he said, there is no sentiment more universally entertained nor more firmly held by the free colored people of the United States than that this is their own, their native land, and that here, for good or for evil, their destiny is to be wrought out. Why was he saying their destiny is to be wrought out? He was referring to a man named Robert Finley in 1816 who started something called the American Colonization Society, and where they was trying to push the indigenous Black Americans to West Africa. They wanted us to go there willingly. They also started something called the Universal Negro Improvement Association, where they wanted to try to force all of the so-called African Americans who are actually indigenous Americans. They wanted to force us to willingly go to Liberia and set up Liberia. In fact, indigenous Americans founded Liberia. Okay? So Frederick Douglass has always known he himself is indigenous. You can Google that. There's also an article with Frederick Douglass called The Folly of Colonization, into which he said, it is the proposition to colonize the colored people of America in Africa or somewhere else. Happily, this scheme will be defeated, both by its impolicy and its impracticability. It is all nonsense to talk about the removal of 8 million of the American people from their homes in America to Africa. Why did he say that? Why didn't he say Africans moving back home to Africa? Because Frederick Douglass understood that the people you call African Americans are in fact the original indigenous people of America.
These are the Americas, North, Central, and South. So these three are the Americas right here. So when we say the President of America, understand they're talking about the United States Republic, which is a corporation, not the entire all three. The entire all three is just like calling yourself an African. Which country in Africa are you a part of? You can't say, oh, I'm an American. Which one? What do you mean? Are you a North American, Central American, or South American? Because now we understand the question when somebody tells you that the Africans were brought out of Africa to Americas. Your following question should be, which America? When?
Thank you.
And which America were they brought here? They're talking about the British colonies, which we know as the 13 colonies. Man, that was so later after the fact. The British were so fucking far behind. The British got in on the last couple of years of trading, because at the time that they were bringing Negroes supposedly out of Africa, there was nothing for them to do here yet. Not yet. Cotton don't come to the 1800s. 1808, they outlawed the export or import of people from Africa. It's outlawed. Like it was
Correct.
a law of the sea. We catch you with niggas on the boat, we're gonna lock y'all up and set them free. Outlaw. So 1808, there were no more Negroes coming to America. How many were brought to North America? They say millions. A lie. That's a lie. So let's debunk that and let's get it out of our minds right now that any part of you came out of Africa. And this is nothing against our African brothers and sisters, but they know that also. That's why ain't not one fucking canoe been over here yet to get you. So now that we understand that, I'm going to show y'all one more thing that we're going to move forward. Now that we understand that the way they taught us about Africans out of Africa to the Americas is not only is it false information, it's misleading information.
If these people came from over there already, why are you making deals with other foreign countries for land to send American Indians over to Africa to start colonies? Liberia, Sierra Leone. I mean, all this stuff is factual information. Think about it. The first president was from America. The capital is named Monrovia after President James Monroe. So now you have to ask yourself, were they really over there grabbing millions and millions and millions and millions of people? Or could this be another part of Woodrow Wilson's creation of the educational system? To reprogram you with this television, with this media, to make you think and believe about the next man or woman without judging who they are on your own. Again, you have to realize a lot of this stuff was given to us from the same people that said they don't want you, they want to hate you, gonna turn around and give you your true history. I don't think so.
And you just don't hear the Indian story in these situations. So back to Roots, there's a couple scenes in Roots where they let you in on some couple things. There's a particular character in Roots by the name of Fiddler, and there's a portion in the movie where Fiddler is now bringing Kunta Kinte to the plantation for the first time in the movie, at the Keshes part. And what would hit me like 1,000 bricks was, why is he explaining to the crowd of people in the movie what an African is?
Let me show you something. This here is a Guinea man, an African. They catch him running through the woods in Guinea. Master Reynolds brought him right off the ship. Now you keep away from it now, because he a wild African. Oh yeah, he a bobcat for sure. Now some of you ain't never seen no African niggas before. Now some of you ain't never seen no African niggas before. Now some of you ain't never seen no African niggas before. So you just listen to old Fiddler now. This here Guinea man don't know English talking. So I'll be the one teaching him what it is he got to know.
This is movie Roots. So, but back then, you know, in our advantage, in our young age, we would have never saw that scene. I've seen the movie 1,000 damn times and never seen that scene. It's only because now I'm hyper aware of our indigenous ancestry in the Americas that I can even catch that part of the movie. So Fiddler he has Toby on the chain, right? Now tell people in these slave movies, whether it's Django, 12 Years a Slave, Glory, any of these movies, take notice how they only have certain Negroes in chain. The Negroes in chain were not the slaves. The Negroes in the chain were not the slaves. Those Negroes knew about their freedom. They kept running away. In fact, they kept running away so much, it was a term they called drapetomania. It was a mental condition of wanting to be free. This is so-called European psychology, pseudo-psychology. And this is coming on the heels of things like eugenics with Eugene Fisher and Johann Blumenbacher and so many others, white pseudoscientists. But now, that scene in Roots, the camera is panning by the so-called plantation Negroes, and you see the women with the head wraps on, their turbans. The turbans are turned this way, not the other way. There's actually a law implemented in the French quarters in New Orleans where they had to cover their long Indian hair up. And then the little so-called Negro children were known as pickaninnies. These are pickaninnies, by the way. Fiddler is explaining, this is what he said, verbatim. He said, this here is an African. I know a lot of y'all never seen no African before. I said, wait a minute, what the hell did he just say? Why would he tell these so-called Negroes they ain't never seen an African before? I thought they were African.
Welcome to Exhibit B, the exile plot. This was never about liberty. This was about identity theft in broad daylight.
Who taught you to use from Africa? Who gave us the out of Africa theory? I'm going to give you the individual's person name. Write him down. Franz Boas, the father of modern anthropology. Now, following him, you get Dr. Leakey. And Dr. Leakey talks about Zanzanthropus, the oldest supposed Homo sapien out of Africa. So the idea implanted in your head is a bunch of pseudoscience. You get Franz Boas. You get what's your boy name with the dealing with evolution?
Darwin.
Pseudoscientists. Who else? German scientists, such as Johann Blumenbacher, Samuel Morton, and so on and so forth. The idea you coming out of Africa was propagated by individuals not even from Africa. You can't find not one Negro philosopher or anthropologist at that time that was talking about Africa. That was later, when you get years later in like the 60s and 70s, you get Dr. John Henry Clark and Dr. Ben Joseph, rest in peace to everybody, and Chancellor Williams and so on and so forth, talking about the destruction of a black civilization, and they came with that information later. All right, but if you want to think you from Africa, that's cool. That's cool. Just study Franz Boas first, and then let's circle back on the conversation about those slave ships, because I don't rock with that. Now, what you may be mistaking the transatlantic slave trade for is this right here. Domestic slavery. Now, domestic slave trade is what affected us the most. When I say us, the so-called Negroes, that's when you start seeing auction for Negroes for sale stores. And those pictures you've been seeing, when they say that Negroes for sale, and they look like Native Americans, because that's who they're selling after the 100-year war. See, America was in a state of war from the time of 1619 up until 1965 against these so-called Aborigine individuals in North America. The United States, also known as domestic slave trade or second middle passage. This is the movie 12 Years a Slave, when the brother was in New York shopping with his family, and then they took him down to DC to play the violin, and they got him drunk and threw him in the chambers, and they took his ass from DC all the way around Florida, which looks like they're coming from Africa, up into New Orleans. This is 12 Years a Slave, the movie. And when he got off the boat, he was rubbing his eyes, and you didn't pay attention to that boat was a skiff, not a slave ship. See, the word ship and boat, y'all don't know maritime law, maritime operations, so you think they're the same thing. No, this was just a cargo boat or cargo ship. If you pay attention to the movie 12 Years a Slave, when he got off the ship into New Orleans, there were like barrels of whatever. There was like stacks of cotton, and only about 12 of them got off. And then they went to one of these little auction stores right here. And then that's when the white man sold him off. Told him to play the violin and sold him off. Toward a woman from her family. See, this is the second Atlantic slave. This is the second domestic slave trade, second middle passage, excuse me. This is the one that tore us up here in North America. They brought a lot of brothers and sisters from the north, and they brought them down around Florida into New Orleans and Mississippi into Alabama. This is when the South was known as King Cotton. Tenant farmers. We have to understand sharecropping and tenant farming. And what Hollywood would often do, Hollywood would give us the story of out of Africa, but only show us slavery during the 1800s. Django, 1800s. Roots, 1800s. 12 Years a Slave, 1800s. Color Purple was the early 1900s, but still, you would never see a slave movie take place in Africa. Other than what? One movie. There's only one movie that the African slave trade portrays, and that's Amistad. That's the only slave movie they got about out of Africa. Those other movies that we think are the African diaspora and the Atlantic slave trade, that's actually what was called the second Atlantic slave trade, the domestic slave trade, because in 1808 they outlawed international slave trade. So no more so-called Negroes were brought into the Americas. And a question I like to ask my people is, who solely believe in this out of Africa theory via slave trade, is which America did they come to with slaves?
The whole book's a lie. And if you look at Roots and go get your federal documents, in federal court, a white boy by the name of Harry Colander that wrote The African in 1967, the court documents show that federal judge made all of them pay him $750,000, and in the records they chastised him, saying not only did you lift it out the book, you didn't even change one word. Then a white boy from England named John Rollison. That same judge made them pay him $150,000 because Kunta Kinte came out of his book.